Hi everyone, so here I'm going to talk about the difference between the right and the left hand in hand reading. Now it is probably one of the most common questions that people will have when they come to have a reading with me. Which hand do you want? Do you want my right or my left? And the answer is always both. The more hands, the more information. It hasn't always been the case through palmistry history though. There are some old schools of thought where you would only read the right hand. In Chinese Chirology they would look at the right and the left depending on whether you're a man or a woman in relation to the yin or yang aspects, and in traditional sort of Indian old palmistry it was very much the left is what you're born with and the right is what you've made of it. And a lot of people who come to see me still ask this, is this the case? It's not really quite like that. What we have when we look at the hands is we have an inner hand and an outer hand, depending on which hand you write with. So if you're right-handed, your right hand is your active hand. It's your outer world hand. This is how you present yourself to the public, how you are in a working environment, how your friends, how external acquaintances see you. Your left hand is the inner, more private self. It's who you are behind closed doors. It's the thoughts you have when you're by yourself. The left hand would be who your partner knows or who very close family know and see. If you're left-handed, then it's reversed. So the hand in which you write with is always the active hand, meaning it's the outer worldly self. The inner hand is the private self. Now it gets very interesting when people have got two quite different hands, and there are certain areas of hand reading where you can really start to see differences between someone's outer personality and their inner, more private self. A good example of this is with the fingerprints. Somebody can have quite starkly different fingerprints on one hand and very different fingerprints on the other, and then instantly when you look at their hands you can see the two different sides of their personality. And somebody might be, for example, incredibly confident in the workplace but much shyer at home, or vice versa. So all I'm doing here is breaking some misconceptions and just explaining to you about the right and the left hand and what they mean. So just to make it nice and clear, the hand which you write with is your outer world self. This is how the other people see you. The inner hand, the passive hand, is your connection to who you are. It's the side of you that your partner sees. So the two can be very different, but both in a hand reading are very important for understanding the complexities of someone's character and seeing the person as a whole. Okay, so this is the first hand I wanted to look at. Now, these are the handprints of a policeman, and you can see the structure and physical qualities in this hand here. This chap is quite a strong, well-built guy. If we look at the outer hand, which is his right hand because he's right-handed, if we look at the headline, we can see that the headline's in relatively good condition. It's sort of one line. There's an ever so slight break in there which can show a little bit of a stuttery thought process. But fundamentally, this is a pretty decent headline. It's of medium length. It's got a nice, clear, crisp finish, which shows that this person's going to be able to present themselves as being quite a clear thinker in work. They're going to be able to make quick, good decisions, and that's how people are going to perceive them. However, if we look at his inner hand, his left hand, we can see something slightly different. We can see a rather large island here on the headline. And this island is a pretty distressing factor to have in this size on a headline. What this does is this is going to add a huge amount of confusion and anxiety to the way in which somebody thinks. They're going to feel a lot less clear about their thoughts internally. Their internal dialogue is going to be much more confused. It's going to be very tricky for them to think perfectly clearly. Because what this island does is it means that the train of thought ends up getting stuck in a bit of a loop. It becomes quite difficult for somebody to think past something, to think through something concisely. It's almost like things get put on repeat. So this is definitely a marking of somebody who would experience more anxiety and more stress than normal. And when I spoke to this person about this, they did concede this to be true, and they have quite severe bouts of anxiety and have also had medication for their low moods and their instability, which of course is all internal. And because we can see that this is on the left hand and on the right hand, the headline is much clearer, people at work wouldn't know this. So people who see this person on a day-to-day basis are not going to know what's going on internally, the struggles that they have got going on in their mind and things like this. So looking at both hands becomes very important for this, because if you were just to see the one hand, the right hand, you would totally miss this aspect of the person. Whereas when you look at the left hand as well, you can really see that this island pops out on the hand as one of the main things that you can see initially. So therefore, when you see it, you really know that this is a real talking area and something that's very important to be explored within the reading. You can understand where this person's anxieties are going to be coming from and where the person's going to be feeling stresses. And it's all arising from this island on the headline. So looking at our next hand, I wrote an article about the right versus left hands on my website, and I'm using some of the images from here, and I'm just going to expand on my discussion from there. So these are the hands of a shopkeeper, and if we look at her emotion line on both hands, they're very different. So this is really telling. And if we look at the right hand, she's right-handed, we can see a nice, clear, curved emotion line. So what this shows is a very expressive, very connected, very passionate, and very open person. So when you meet this lady on first impression, this is what you're going to see. You're going to see a very bubbly, very expressive, and very passionate person. Somebody who is very clear in their emotional state. And the emotion line's actually of very good quality. There are very few lines crossing it, and there aren't any blips or anything. So it's somebody who is very, very connected and very expressive, wears their heart on their sleeve. Certainly if they're sad, you're going to see them crying. And if they're happy, they're going to be running around the room and getting very excited and very smiley. So it's a very obvious, clear way of presenting oneself. Now, if you look at the left hand, which is her inner hand, her more private self, when you get to know this lady a little bit more, this is the side you start to see. Now, when the emotion line goes all the way across the hand like this, it's known as a humanitarian line, because what the person becomes is somebody who's incredibly humanitarian. What this means is that they are giving and compulsively wanting to help other people. The reason it's compulsive is because the line cuts across the hand all the way, which means that there's no deviation in this energy of expression. So this person would find it impossible to say no to people. They would be constantly giving. They would always be giving away their time and their energy to anyone who asked of it. And it would mean that they'd be much less expressive of what they're really, truly, deeply feeling than what it would appear they would be based on their right hand. So for example, if this person here was in a relationship and the relationship ended and they were very hurt by it, rather than it being very obvious to everybody that they were very hurt by this ending, they might bury it or it might not be seen, and they might carry it around with them for many, many years rather than quickly expressing it. So the two lines are very different, and it does show that the person's going to be much more emotionally complex than what just simply looking at the right hand would appear. And again, it just shows how important it is to look at both hands, because when you look at her inner hand, her left hand, what this shows is something much more accurate to what she would be like within a relationship with a partner, and what her relationships are going to be like with her friends and with her family. So this is what you'd want to discuss in a deep kind of way. Discuss the areas that the long heart line relates to, and how when it cuts all the way across the hand, it's going to be very important for her to make sure she prioritizes herself, puts her own emotional needs above others, and learns slowly to start saying no to people and to detaching from them rather than constantly and compulsively connecting. Okay, these are our next hands. Now, these are the hands of a man who set up his own production and filming company. And again, he's right-handed, and we're going to look at the differences between the headlines and also the finger lengths as well. So if we look at the right hand, which is his active hand, we can see that his headline is of short to medium length. So what this shows is somebody that's going to be very good at focusing on the here and now, looking at the present, getting things done in the moment. And is going to be good at making quick decisions, is going to be materially orientated. So we can see that this is going to be somebody who's going to be putting a lot of thought into their business and is going to be good at pushing it within its domains. Now, if we look at the left hand, the headline is much longer. On the inner hand, because he's got this longer headline, what it shows is a longer, deeper, more complex thought process. So having a long headline on the inner hand, but then a shorter headline on the outer world is going to mean that people are going to perceive him differently. So people in the external are going to see him as being more in the moment, making quicker decisions, not having the depth of insight and the ponderance that he would have on his inner hand. So somebody who knows him closely as a friend is going to know him as quite a deep, complex thinker, somebody who's going to analyze things in great detail and is going to be interested in things that are more philosophical or psychological or something that's very technical, something that is going to engage this long, complex thought process that he has. However, in the outer world, this isn't seen. If we look at his finger lengths, the finger lengths are quite different as well, which is quite interesting. Particularly on the inner hand, he's got a shorter middle finger. When somebody's got a shorter middle finger, essentially what it does is make them a little bit rebellious. The middle finger is all to do with rules and structures and society and conformity. So when this digit is reduced in size, it means that somebody can be rebellious against these things, can go against the grain and not like conforming, not liking just doing what they're told or just following rules. So this is certainly the case with this person. And again, it might not be something that's totally obvious just by meeting him on first impressions. However, when you get to know this person, you'll see that they're actually very rebellious in their thinking, and they are going to have quite unconformist, unconventional views on things. He's got a long little finger as well, and particularly this is seen on the left hand. So when this is the case, it again is going to add this depth of insight into things. The long little finger adds more of a detective quality to somebody's character, and it adds more depth to their thinking as well as heightened communication. But particularly because it's on the left hand here, we're going to see it as being somebody who's going to be thinking more complexly about things, who's going to be having far greater insight and a greater perception on things. So what we can see from his left hand is that this is going to be an insightful, deep, non-conformist thinker. And as it turns out, this is exactly what the person is. He's very interested in alternative news. He's very well versed on conspiracies, and he's very interested in spiritual things. And he teaches Tai Chi and has written essays and things on Taoist philosophy. What's interesting about this as a comparison between the right and the left is that if you look at the right hand alone does not tell you this kind of information. The right hand shows you a businessman, somebody who's going to be good in the field of communication and somebody that's going to want to be striving to get their company up and running. However, when you look at the left hand, you get all of these intricacies that make the personality what it is. You've got the deeper quality of headline, which shows that intense insight and complexity in thought. You've got the shorter middle finger, which is going to give somebody different political views. It's going to give them a personal view on religion. It's going to make them anti-authority and not want to conform in any kind of senses. And then you've got this large little finger, which is going to add a further depth and insight into all of these areas. So again, looking at the right and the left hand is very, very different, and it's essential whenever you're doing a reading, of course, to look at both and compare these differences. Our next hand here is of a left-handed lady who's 27 years old, which means that her left hand is her active hand. This is her outer worldly self, how she presents herself to people. So we can see a big difference here between the two hands, and we've got a simian line that's very clear on her inner hand. But we've also got a disparity between the finger lengths. So specifically, we're going to be looking at the long index finger on the outer hand and the shorter index finger on the inner hand. So the longer index finger on the outer hand shows that this is a lady who's going to present herself as being very confident, very in control, very responsible. And this is certainly how people are going to see her. Whenever anybody's got a large index finger like this, they're always going to come across as being confident, as being self-assured, as being somebody who's very capable and someone who's responsible in whatever domain it is that they're in. However, if we look at her inner hand, the index finger is actually short comparative to the third finger. So what this means is that when somebody gets to know her, when somebody gets close to her, this is going to be the side that they're going to see, the person with the shorter index finger, which shows that their sense of self-esteem, their sense of self-worth, and their perception of themselves is going to be reduced. Because the first finger relates to one's sense of self and how they see themselves, when it's small like this, it means that somebody's confidence can actually decrease slightly. So this is going to be a big difference between how she is seen in a working environment and how she is privately with her friends and in a relationship. And this is very important, of course, for her, because as a water hand, relationships are the most important thing to her. So understanding this difference in her is very important for her, because she of course wants to understand how other people perceive her on first impression, but also understand what she's like within a relationship and how building on self-esteem and self-confidence is actually very important for her. Now, if we look at the difference between the right and the left hand in terms of the lines, on the left hand, the outer hand, we can see a curved heart line and then the headline, which is the typical way to have it. However, on the inner hand, we've got this simian line, this merging of both lines. So the simian is obviously going to permeate throughout her personality. It's not just going to be totally isolated to the inner hand, because it's such a dominant feature to have on any hand. But what it does show is, because she hasn't got it on the outer hand, it means that on first impression, people aren't going to see this real level of intensity that she's got. The simian line on her inner hand is going to make her incredibly driven, very, very focused. All of her energy is going to be channeled in one direction, and anything she sets her mind to, she's going to do with incredible force, so much so that other people wouldn't really be able to compete. I was talking to her about this, and this was kind of the case. She was completing her PhD when I gave her her reading, and she completed it something like a year and a half ahead of schedule, and all of her tutors and everyone at the university was in disbelief, because they'd never seen anyone complete and study this hard and this well. And of course, when you meet this person on first impression, you don't see this level of intensity, you don't see this simian quality that she's got on her inner hand. So people weren't to know that she was going to work ruthlessly through the night and completely obsessively and get everything done at an absolute whirlwind pace. She also described how in her private life she would stay up for long hours into the night painting, and she would over the week produce many different paintings and get really involved with all the different artistic processes, and switch between this and doing her studies, and really do it in quite a militant sort of way. And this is a very simian line quality as well, to get really obsessed and really into something like this. She was also, of course, very smart, and she taught herself astrology, and she was very, very well read on the subject, and did this all in the last year, despite the fact that she was doing her PhD, doing all of this painting and doing everything at this very, very fast pace that really only a simian line could do. So again, just looking at the differences between the right and the left hand, we can really see that the index finger is noticeably different between the two, which is going to change how she presents herself in terms of confidence to how she might internally feel. And it's important for her to understand that people are always going to perceive her as confident, even though she might not always feel it. And finally, this is our last hand. This is of a middle-aged lady, and we can see that there's quite a difference in the quality of her lifeline and her fate line on both hands. So she's right-handed, so first of all, looking at her right hand, what we can see is that the lifeline is intertwined with the fate line. And what this shows is somebody whose fate line is very much supplementing and supporting the lifeline. So this means that somebody's job and their career, which is what the fate line represents, is going to become so integral to them that it is what actually gives them all of their support and structure, which are the qualities that the lifeline gives. So because the lifeline doesn't go all the way down to the bottom of the hand, and the fate line is actually the line that ends up holding everything together, it means that this is literally what happens. Someone's job and their work becomes everything. It becomes their stability, it becomes their routine, it becomes their support. And this is very much the case of this lady. She was a self-confessed workaholic. She put everything into her career. She was always thinking about it, always working. And this was basically the way in which she was running her life. Now, if we look at her left hand, we can see a different pattern. And this pattern is quite telling. And what this shows is really what's going on psychologically quite deeply for this person. And we can see that the lifeline is really non-existent once we sort of get halfway below the hand. And when this is the case, it means that somebody's sense of root, their stability, is going to be very, very shaky. They haven't got anything that's making them feel very grounded. They haven't got anything that's really making them feel solid and secure. So what we can see is that internally this person's going to feel very shaky, they're going to feel very floaty, and they're going to feel ungrounded. However, externally, the way they're combating this is by putting all of their energy into work, by focusing very, very hard on their career. And then by doing this, they're kind of vicariously trying to support themselves through their work and give themselves this sense of structure and strength. But internally, we can see it's not really working. They still feel fragile, they still feel a little bit shaky, and they're just not going to be anywhere near as grounded and strong psychologically or physically as what they want to be. So explaining this to this lady is incredibly helpful, because what you can do by looking at both hands in this way is really separate out the different issues, so it's easy to compartmentalize them. This lady had done a lot of traveling and she was moving house quite a lot of the time, and this is very often the case when somebody hasn't got a rooted lifeline, because what they try to do is find somewhere that feels like home, find somewhere that's going to make them feel secure and stable, because internally this isn't what they've got. But by looking at the hand, we can see that it's nothing really to do with the external situations. It doesn't matter where this person's going to live. She's still going to feel unstable. She's still not going to feel connected and grounded because she hasn't got a strong lifeline. So what we discussed was the importance of actually putting down roots in one location. And this was something that really resonated with her, and she got very, very excited and was really pleased to have this conversation, because it was kind of like a light is being switched on, or somebody's ringing this bell that she kind of already knew was very important and was the case. But when you're reading somebody's hand in this kind of way, you can just reflect something that's going on internally, and when that's done, it really rings true with the person and allows them to make that change. So what she did after the reading was she bought herself a house and she started committing to it. So she started planting things in the garden, she started doing a vegetable patch, and she started making connections all around the house and planting roots literally within her base and her home, which would be the sort of things needed to start developing this lifeline internally. And of course, she did this as well as cutting down on the work hours, not putting so much of her energy and attention into work, and just directing it back in towards herself and finding this stability and finding this root. So by looking at both of her hands, this was really, really important, because what we could do is see the complexity of this issue around her sense of stability and her relationship to work. And if we just looked at one hand, we wouldn't have seen this. We wouldn't have seen all the nuances within the situation. But of course, by looking at both, you can see all the complexities within all the situations in relation to work and in relation to the lifeline and her sense of stability. Okay everybody, thank you for watching the video. I hope I've emphasised and demonstrated the importance and the necessity really of reading both hands if you're to get a complete and accurate picture of someone's personality and their character, and also where they're currently at in life. If you have any questions, just pop them in the comments box and I'll try and get back to you.